recorded.
So today is Thursday, the 27th of April, and I'm delighted that today's Tech Hour is a follow-up on the highly successful archive accessibility forum of a couple of weeks ago. And it's been stimulated by that event, and I hope that it will add to the momentum that is building up. When you've got 2 million articles, you don't move things quickly, but when you can move things, they have a certain momentum and weight. So I'm going to start with some general remarks, which is that in a situation like this, there are at least three important questions. The first is, where do we want to be and when? And the second is, where are we now? And the third is, in what direction do we move? What's the next thing to do? Or, yes, what's the next thing to do? And by the way, it may not be proceed towards the goal. We may have to step back in order to go forward. It may be that there's a river that we have to cross, and we have to go along the river one way or the other until we come to a crossing point. Or it may be there are dependencies that we have to resolve. But those three things are important, A, B, and C. Where we are, where we want to be, and what we do in the present situation. So there are multiple stakeholders, and one of them are the authors, and every author, when they're in the process of authoring, has a strong, deep, unique focus and intensity of interest on one paper. So that's a very narrow, small, it's got little width and lots of depth. And the LaTeX ML team, our goal, of course, is to get accessible HTML from the content of the archive available to improve accessibility. So the LaTeX ML team, my impression is they're very much focused on the success of the conversion process and the problems of the conversion process. And I might be contradicted here, but I would like the archive, or I like to believe that the archive has a strong focus on the corpus. So the LaTeX ML would be disappointed if they lost their source code, and the corpus and the archive would be disappointed if they lost their corpus of articles and if the articles were no longer available to their readers in the submission process. So these people have different sort of points of view, and the idea of width and depth is quite important, because even though the authors have this narrow focus on one article and they know it very well, and they're very focused, highly motivated because it's their article, we have a backlog of 2 million articles, and that's extremely broad. And the problem is not to get an even broader picture, the problem is to get more depth. And the focus of what I'm doing at the moment is understanding the corpus via the XML log files. So every R5 transformation generates a log file, and I'm starting to find my way around those log files, and the log files reference something in the source document and finding out what these log files mean. And my motivation for that is that there's some interest in providing advice to authors and tools to help them when they submit to the archive, or before they even submit to the archive, to say, this is the accessibility situation regarding your paper. And one way to do that, of course, is to provide a preview. But the preview will have a log file, and I'm finding already that there are things arising that are fairly easy to discover, low-hanging fruit, if you will. There are things that are fairly easy to discover that can be translated into advice for authors. And even though it might only improve matters a bit in 5% of the papers, that's a start. And it starts a conversation. And it's a team building thing, if you like. So the focus is actually on providing evidence-based advice and support tools to authors to be used as part of the submission process. That's the thing I'm presently focused on. I'm not looking beyond that towards the accessibility, and I'm not even looking at providing that advice. I'm looking at understanding the corpus with that question in mind. So it's rather like, if you like, a doctor who's seeing the patient, and the first thing the doctor wants to do is understand the illness and understand the patient, because the illness is only of interest because it affects a patient. And on the basis of that, they can then proceed to treatment or referral to a specialist or whatever. So we'll see this more concretely because I've inspected the log files for 3 articles on the archive that have been translated into HTML using the LaTeX ML process, and that's going to be the body, the substance of the talk. So I think that's good enough to be getting going. And are there any questions or comments at this point?
Yes, comment, if I may, Jonathan. So from what I understand, you are the patient you're looking at, if you like, is current authors or future authors, because we're talking about 30 years of submissions, right? You can't go back and say, do this to an author who submitted 20 years ago.
Some things might be possible to fix after the event, but I don't want to look at the past just for its own sake. I personally have got a very strong interest in converting the backlog. That's my personal interest is learning about the backlog. But I recognize that there are other important stakeholders, and the contribution my looking at the backlog will do is provide evidence for going forward. So externally, you're correct. Internally, my motivation is slightly different. And whilst it's worth saying that my focus is not on improving LaTeX ML, and if it is on improving LaTeX ML, it will be in a rather unexpected way, not necessarily a bad way. My focus is actually on understanding the corpus. And part of that is because I have my own un-LaTeX approach, which I might talk about at the end if there's time. So I think that's a nice question. It helps put everything into place. Perhaps I could start screen sharing, and then we'll get some interesting things happening. Share screen, to my screen, allow. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so I can't see anything that's going on now because I've moved my Zoom window elsewhere. So this is the R5 homepage, and it's an Archive Labs project. The URL is the archive URL, except we replaced the X with the 5, and the 5 rhymes a bit with archive R5, and it's supposed to represent HTML5. And I'll show you the, what's the word? That poster boy example, poster child example. So this is a proof of the quadratic formula And if we just look at it, it seems quite nice. And I think it is quite nice. And I assume that it has been automatically created from a document in the archive. So it's not a handcrafted special. It's not a Potemkin village. But when you've got 2 million articles, you can't spend the entire day reading the corpus article by article. You need computers to do the reading for you. So what I'm going to do now is show you an issue I raised. Oh, whilst we look at this, yes, well, whilst we're here, at the bottom of the page, and it's not very obvious, but at the bottom of the page, there's a link to the log report. And I guess this might have been a bit cherry-picked because there are no errors at all in the log report. So we don't, from this, see any of the warnings or errors that might take place. And at some point, it might be interesting to know why this article is so good, as opposed to why the other articles aren't so good. So let me go to this issue I raised, which is I poked around with the log files for a number of articles until I sort of got some sense as to what was going on. And then I looked at one of them fairly seriously and found some things that were interesting. And so I opened an issue on the archive server, on the archive GitHub pages. And the title, I think, says it all. Understand many conversion errors and warnings. So the conversion process from archive source files to HTML produces, as well as the main output, errors and warnings. And the objective is to understand many of the errors and warnings. And the purpose of understanding them is that they come out in a fairly standardized way. And this helps us increase the depth of understanding across the whole corpus. So whenever there's an error that we can understand in one document, if we understand it well enough, we might know better how to discover it or discover it's not present across the whole corpus. So it's rather like looking at a few samples so that we can get a tool that we can apply that look at all of them. So we look at a few carefully and design a tool that allows us to have the machine do the work. So this is quite similar to what happens in artificial intelligence, machine learning, in that you divide the data into two, one of which is the training set and the other of which is the test set. And you train the data in one form or another, and then you apply it to the test set to see how well you're doing, except we're not using computers except at the very end to search for things. Maybe at some point, machine learning, artificial intelligence could be used to understand the conversion errors and to do that sort of thing. But that's not my skill, and we'll see what goes on. So I raised this, and I looked at one particular example, and I'll show you that in the other window. If I make this bigger, it'll make, yeah. So there's a lot of uninteresting information and a lot of timing information. But then we get this warning not parsed, relop number malloc math parser failed to match any rule in the text file. Here's the location. Here's the specific location, and there's this formula sim 4 times, and the math parser failed for some reason. I wanted to understand that error. So I looked at the HTML and I looked at the PDF, and they both seemed to be fine. So I thought, what's gone on here? It's saying there's an error. What does it mean? I don't see anything wrong in the output. And there's two more of these errors in this document. And apart from that, it's good. When I looked at the text source, here's the bit that was quoted, which is 4 symbols, sim 4 times. And in fact, what we had was with the mass of sim 4 times, one formula, white space, 10 to the 6, white space, math Roman, m sub o dot. I think that means the mass of the Earth or something. The o dot is, in this astrophysics paper, is being used for an astronomical unit of measurement. And even I got this wrong. I wrote that this is 2 formulas separated by white space. We have in fact got 3 formulas here separated by white space. And what's happening, I think, is that the author is using the breaking up of the formula to control the spacing, or doesn't know. There's something happening here that is not good tech practice. And more to the point for what we're doing, it affects the accessibility, because when this is being screen read, the screen reader will go in and out of math mode, when in fact the whole thing should be read probably in math mode. Or perhaps it would be better read in astronomical mode, but we don't have such a mode. But it's so that's what I got from that. And then I say, this is how I want to deal with this. And I think that we want a sample of reports that's bigger than 2. And I'm asking, my goal is understand Marigny conversion errors and warnings. And I now understand that conversion error, which I didn't understand before. And I understand it not only from the technical point of view, but from the corpus point of view, and from what the author is doing. And it's interesting that this one here, the sim 4 times, produces an error, whereas the 10 to the 6, of course, does not produce an error. And in fact, the error is that these 2 dollar signs should probably be removed. So that's quite interesting. It's a positive with a false reason. It's not a false positive. It's not a false negative. It's a true positive with a false reason. And then I say, and then I give some sense about what's going on. Deanne, who's the main person in R5, is quite pleased, and he gives a place where we can query the system. We'll look at that in a bit. And he says I can log down log files. He thinks crowdsourcing might work. I hope he's right. And I'm taking him at his word and trying to move in that direction. So part of what I'm trying to do here is to move into a crowdsourcing perspective. And that's why in the announcement I said, anybody can contribute. And even though it's not strictly true, it's certainly the direction in which I want to move. I want to move in the direction where anybody can come in and contribute their knowledge of tech or some other skills in order to help us understand conversion errors and warnings. And then this this thing here was quite unexpected to me, where again, dollar signs are being used in a very funny way, which the math parsing is picking up. And if for something like this, where the left parenthesis, it's very, very odd. I think what they've tried to do there is to get a Roman Z in the formula. I think they've done that to try and get a Roman Z in the formula. but it makes it really unpleasant for future use, for reuse. Okay, so that's what we got. Oh, I like this. Dinev says, we're very much in alignment. I think we're very much in alignment on how we solve the archive to HTML problem. So that's really encouraging. And then he gave me this, which is really useful, which is what I've started doing. And today, as part of my contribution, I looked at a couple of articles. So let me show you what I'm Feeling Lucky looks like. So here's this URL. I'll copy it. I'll do this. So I think Google has or had a button on its search page, I'm Feeling Lucky, that took you directly to the to the first result for your query. So when I do Feeling Lucky, it'll give you a random article. And this is Nutation versus Angular Department NQR spectroscopy and the impact of underdoping on charge in homogeneities of YBACU30Y. And if we go to the bottom, we see a conversion report and we see that it's got warnings. So let's look at the conversion report. We got a not passed, another not passed, another not passed, another not passed, 8 warnings, and otherwise fine. So that's pretty good. Now, I was a bit unlucky, I think, or lucky, depending on what you're trying to do, because my 2 examples actually produced quite a few interesting things. So I'm using a different I'm sort of developing my own sort of template for this sort of thing. So here's the archive page. Here's the HTML and here's the log. So these things are all available. And I actually report 3 issues. And this is for information only. I'm not asking that the issues be fixed. And here's an error that I found about 20 times. Here's an error that I found. And I don't quote everything, but this is what they wrote. And you see it ends on an equal sign? And that gives the failure of the parsing. And what the author is doing is they don't know how to do math displays, I think, with lines of code, and they don't know how to do alignments and that sort of thing. So they're just saying, here's one formula, here's another formula, here's another formula, here's another formula, because they're breaking up a formula in the same way as you'd break up a paragraph into lines if the text of the paragraph is too wide. So that's what they've done here. While I was there, I noticed that the HTML said that it was a recent article. And I thought, oh, this is a recent article. And then I looked at the PDF and it said different date. And the PDF side banner, the archive articles have a side banner. And the abstract page on the archive gives you this date. And the reason why I looked at those things is I just happened to notice that the text source had date today, which is a very obvious thing to do if you're an author, and you might customarily do that all the time. But it does mean that when the article is reprocessed, and it seems as though the archive did reprocess this on the last year, a year ago or so, it gets the date at which it is reprocessed. So here's the further information, which is just, I know these things, you can set these values. And one might like to search through the corpus to see how many of the articles use /today. And so have this, I can use the word time bomb. It certainly sort of allows the author, if the author is allowed to make the article depend on today, then it can reprocess the thing such that next year the alternative text is included. So So that's the first one I looked at. And then the second one is quite interesting. Now, I haven't shown you the root. Okay, here I get 17 issues, one issue twice and one issue 5 times. The work in going from, this is the report. Let me again copy here. So, oops, that's the wrong thing. We want the log, don't we? So here's the log file. And it's very interesting. It says that the UTF-8 input isn't valid under encoding UTF-8. Line 1049, column 0 to column 0. And I thought, it's very odd. And then we get another one, column 0 to column 0. So I actually had to poke into the file to find out what was going on there. And then the second thing is another not parsed. And I didn't look into what was going on with these, I don't think. But the Unicode problem, the UTF-8 problem, I found that the source file, and I had to do sort of picking up bits of information and copying, pasting to open it. It would be nice to automate all of this stuff. So one of the tests is, can you read the file? Can you read the file using Python as a Unicode file? And we got a OXE9, which is a useful piece of information at a particular position. And with a bit of work, and I used my Python skills, I found that this is what I actually did to. Oh, sorry, I have to correct this. I opened the file and read the whole file. Then I defined a bytes object that had 1 byte, which was the thing that had the hexadecimal code E9. And then I found it in the data file, which is 73577. And then I gave a different context. I looked at that bad byte and looked at the context of 30 characters either side. And we see that we get a bibliography entry for Comte Redu Academy Side Paris, S, accent E. Not even sure what's going on here. I'm not even sure what's going on here.
I think what you're seeing there, Jonathan, is there's a Latin 1 or ISO 8859-1 character that's in a Unicode file and hasn't been translated from that character set to Unicode.
Okay.
This is a common problem because people do cut and paste from web sources and they don't realize that what they see on the screen is possibly in a different character set than they're currently using in their document.
Mm-hmm. Well done. You've contributed.
Yeah. I've seen this a fair number of times in bibliographic work.
Well, can I ask you, if you don't already have one, get an account on GitHub for the precise reason of adding a comment to this issue, providing the explanation that you just gave. And I like to control my action sometimes in terms of, do I have a special responsibility here? Do I have a special knowledge? Or am I in a special position? And I'd be really delighted if, on a similar basis, you could add another comment. It's very easy to do. You just, oh, I'm not signed. Why am I not signed in? Perhaps I am signed in. If you're signed into GitHub, you have an opportunity to comment on this issue. Yeah, here we go. I can comment here. And if you're signed into GitHub, you can comment here, and that will contribute to the outcome.
I'll see if I can do that after lunch.
That would be brilliant. And it will be an example for others, which is really very important as well. It's all part of building community. And then I'm sort of doing it diligently because I want to provide a pattern that somebody can write a program that will automatically take all these UTF-8 errors and give a better report. And given that the UTF-8 error actually arose from something that is quite independent from LaTeX ML, one ought to be able to run these things really quickly as a preliminary inspection. This should be part of the preliminary inspection of the source file. And the output I've got, this is what we got from the, where is it? The LaTeX file. That's what I got in the LaTeX file. That's what we got in the HTML. And the E acute has been, the E acute has been lost and replaced by a space. And in the PDF, we get this. Oh, and this is interesting as well. So when we copy this accented character here, it becomes 2 characters when we copy and paste. And I suspect it's a combining character together with a character that's accented, but I'm not sure. I just don't know. And those sorts of details are quite important for people that care about bibliographies. So that's quite nice. And we got that. We got that. Now, there was a third issue that I was missing. I think it's here. Oh yes, this one here. I just happened to notice that there's a figure that showed as a black box, first figure. So I just saw it standing there. It was just showing it out. And it renders as a black box and there's no report of it at all. So I've done quite well out of this one because I've found a bug in the way in which arXiv uses, I mean, it may not be a big bug, but it's a bug in the way the arXiv uses TeX. A bug in the image conversion that hasn't been reported, that's more to the point. And then what we've got as before is funny use of $signs and delimiters for mathematics for what might be regarded as an improper reason, and it's manifesting itself as a math path parser error. So I'm quite happy with the results I've got so far. And what I want to do now is go to this thing here, which I didn't know about. Oh, no, I didn't want that one. I wanted to copy this link. So it turns out, it turns out that there's error reporting information already. And having done a bit of the field work myself, I understand things a lot better. So a task is, I think, a document that's being converted. And we get 1 in 8, 1 in 6 tasks. And there's 300,000 tasks approximately. And there's about 1 million error messages for open and 1 million error message for VertBar. VertBar is interesting because that was one of the things that Neil Sofer said was troublesome for the conversion that they'd like to improve things with. And it turns out that the LaTeX ML conversion is getting 100, is getting a million cases where it can't understand VertBar. And maybe it's trying the wrong thing, but it's interesting that VertBar is high on this list and on Neil Sofer's list. And then there are more of them and more of them, and some of them are pretty bizarre and unusual. And at this point, we're sort of getting to the dregs. And well, for things like this, you'd like to know how many papers. Perhaps there's just one paper that has all of these errors. That would be interesting to know. But that's not where to start. Where to start, because we want to understand many conversion errors and warnings, is to start at the top of this list. So based upon the limited experience of a sample of 2, the objective is to get a sample of each of these, say 100, and divide it into 2 and try and understand half, and then see if your understanding of the half carries through when you understand the second half. And if we can't explain what the author was trying to do that gave rise to the open, then we haven't understood the conversion error. When I say understand the conversion error, that means be in a position to say how it arose and perhaps how it can be fixed. All that we've got at present is that there was a conversion error. And I suspect that most of the conversion errors are due to something other than a fault in the LaTeX ML framework. It's something to do with corpus error. So I think I can stop sharing my screen now. And we're sort of coming towards the end. So I'll stop the share.
So, Jonathan, one comment I would have on this mixture of character sets, the IconV tool, which is one of the standard GNU tools widely available on Unix flavors, can do character set translations, and it will diagnose these. Unfortunately, at least in years past, on the first error, it bailed out, which meant it could never be reliably used as a filter because you'd end up with partial documents. I reported this to its author, and he or she refused to change the software. So I made my own version that keeps on trucking and puts a distinctive square bracketed phrase in the middle of unknown text to warn things. But it's an issue that I see much less now than I did 10 years ago, as publishers were putting new material on the web, and their web pages were very frequently mixtures of Latin 1, Latin 2, UTF-8, and so on. It was a dreadful mess, and it looks like now they're cleaning their act up and are sticking strictly to UTF-8.
I'm very appreciative of that, and somehow we have to find a way of getting the information available to the right people. And in a certain sense, that's not my responsibility, certainly not at this time. And I'm hoping that at some point, the R5 in the archive will see value in what might be emerging from this. At the moment, it's just interesting or promising. David Fielding in the chat says, have you tried to repair some of these issues in regenerating the HTML using LaTeX ML? And the answer is no. That's going for me in the wrong direction. We have 2 million articles, and there's no point going deep into an article except with the view to spreading it across the whole corpus. And at the moment, the spreading across the whole corpus in terms of understanding the error rather than categorizing it as a MULT problem in LaTeX ML or something like that is the thing that I'm focused on. I have limited time. So as justification for that, we've picked up the Unicode error, and courtesy of an expert being present at the Tech Hour today, thank you, Nelson, we've got some insight and help on it, and we certainly have some engagement on that. So that's the direction I'm wanting to go in, which is to understand individual articles only with a view to understanding the whole corpus.
I've got a question. So a few points, but very briefly on that, the error that you got, those three, that equation that was split into three for whatever reason to make it easier for the author. I can't even remember it having an equal sign at the end of an inline equation. Does that give an error?
No, it's not a LaTeX error at all.
Okay. So what was that? Can you explain what that was?
What I believe it is that the LaTeX ML software is aiming to create semantic MathML.
Okay.
So equality is generally speaking a binary operation.
Yeah. And
I mean, sometimes you might use less than as a subscript or equals as a subscript. But generally speaking, equals is a binary operation, and it was not finding the right-hand side because it was in another math formula.
Right, and the problem with the \times symbol is that is very frequently used, especially in the computer science literature, to mean the previous number multiplied, but it's not a binary operator there. It's a postfix unary operator, just as plus and minus can be both unary and binary operators. And I suspect their grammar is just a little too strict.
I believe that there's one glyph in the at least one glyph in plain tech where it has two, colon might be it, where it has two names depending on its mathematical role as an atom or as a binary operator or whatever. The spacing rules that tech uses depends upon categorizing the symbols in them, which all goes into math code.
And also the fact that open occurred at almost at maybe the very top of the list of common errors. I suspect they're looking for balanced parentheses, brackets, braces, and so on. And if you think of the notion for intervals where you use a parenthesis to indicate the boundary of the interval, but not including that number, and square brackets mean to include that number. So you very frequently see open paren followed by closed square bracket and vice versa. And so looking for balance in such delimiters is problematic.
I think these MathML reports that the archive, that the LaTeX ML system is developing are of interest, but it's not quite clear to whom. The reason I say that is because the people who are doing mathematical proofs and the people that are doing computer algebra want the mathematics that they write to translate into something that a computer really can understand, in the sense that they can do a computation based upon it. I use a computer algebraist called PariGP, and you have to put multiplication signs in, otherwise it interprets it as if you took two parameterized expressions adjacent to each other, it thinks it's a function call, so you have to put a multiplication sign in. However, if you write 5 caret 21, that gives you 5 to the 21, not 5 squared followed by the number 1, which doesn't make any sense anyway from a computer algebra system. So one would like to see a convergence rather than divergence between the mathematic notation that is used in print and the mathematical notation that's used in computer algebra and that which is used in proof systems. Or at least if not convergence, at least you'd like to know what the differences are and have some measure of controlling them. So these reports that are being created might be valuable, but not necessarily for the purpose of accessibility. I've probably said more than I needed to on that.
Among the list of errors that were reported in that frequency descending table you showed, are there some that are clearly not mathematical errors that occur in normal prose, or were almost all of them from mathematics?
All right. I've eyeballed, just very quickly, just to get the feel, glanced across the crowd, about half a dozen. And then I looked at 3 seriously. I don't have enough information to answer that question.
That's fine. But I think this could suggest that at archive.org in the upload process, there could be more filtering tools that do things like check for mixed character sets and so on that might prevent this from happening in the future. It won't solve the problem for the existing corpus, however.
Yeah, if I go back to what I said at the beginning, for my own purpose of making un-LaTeX work, I want to understand the corpus. For my own purpose and a wider purpose of working together to make things better, I want that understanding that I'm developing to contribute to other things. And I realized that the log files from the best way to get a broad understanding, but not necessarily a deep understanding of the corpus, is to use the error reports from the archive. And whilst I'm largely focused on going back, which is the question that Kaveh asked, in order to keep myself connected, if you like, I'm also seeing what it means going forward. And I quote myself to save myself troubling my memory. So there's a focus on an evidence-based advice and support tools to authors, e.g. as part of the submission process. That's something that might be a deliverable out of this. And we have one item at the moment, which is a Unicode check. Oh, and we could probably check for mathematical formulas being adjacent to each other, except for white space in between. That should raise a flag. And again, that's a check that can be done even before, it will run very quickly, and it can be done even before running the LaTeX ML translation. And if you run it before the LaTeX ML translation, then you can get the same error message from LaTeX ML, but LaTeX ML can also look up and say, oh, well, let's put this additional information that's arrived from elsewhere into the error report. Namely, this is a mathematical formula followed by space, followed by another mathematical formula. That might be what the problem really is. So it can improve the error reporting of LaTeX ML, for example.
I have a question for our friends from archive.org, because in previous Tech Office hours, it's been noted that multiple versions of LaTeX have been kept at archive.org and documents are tested against them. Is there additional filtering, such as on the character set problem?
Hi, Chris.
Hello. I'm not sure I can address that.
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't think we're doing
thank you.
anything. Yeah, we're not doing anything particular on the character set.
Yeah, my suspicion is that if you were to introduce such a filter, you would find a pretty large number of documents with cut and paste errors arising from mixed character sets. I've seen this as recently in the last week with one of our local users who had a similar problem.
Kelly.
Yeah, I think this might be along the same lines, but I come into a lot of problems where people cut and paste quotes, not knowing that you should be using 2 single quotes to, make a double quotation, and just errors in copy and pasting, going from, say, a Word document and then throwing that into a text file and trying to render it, and then the output looking quote unquote funny.
Thank
Yes,
you for that.
And I see much the same thing. I've seen a fair number of documents, and especially in online articles, where the only non-ASCII characters that are used in the document are single and double quotation marks in Unicode form. And they just don't exist in ASCII, but TeX has a nice representation with forward and backward quotes. So my personal rule for creating input for LaTeX is always to stick with ASCII. But I recognize that people writing in languages with lots of accents, where they have those accented characters on their keyboards, really need to use Unicode input.
I've just put into the chat, copy and paste from other documents might be an easy area for providing some improvements. I think solving the problem properly, so to speak, might be a longer term goal, but warning people of the errors of copy and paste and doing some simple things to reduce the pain would also be worth doing. But from my point of view, not because you feel like these tools and advice should be evidence-based. And if they are evidence-based, then we can measure their effectiveness in terms of the reduction of, in terms of these problems arising less often after you've done your promotional material and introduced the tools.
Sorry, did Kelly just put a hand up? I'd rather she should.
Oh, Kelly, I think Kelly's finished.
The same hand. Okay.
I do have another comment, but it goes back to the quotes, that most people that I deal with don't know, I would say 99% of the rules that go along with LaTeX. But the reason why they notice that their quotes are wrong is because when they upload their file to GitHub, the HTML, CSS, whatever that GitHub uses, highlights those quotations when they're copied and pasted and then in the wrong form as bright red. And I don't think that they're meaning to really do that, but it makes it where it's very apparent to my co-authors that they've done something. And so basically, I think as far as like crowdsourcing goes, if you can try to get linters to show people what's going on, and they don't like to see those colors because it's like bright red and it triggers something in them and they'd like them to go away. And so then they actually fix it. But if you just have like instructions out there that you shouldn't be doing these things, it leads to nothing, from what I've experienced. And so that's largely why we get rid of those quotation marks and do them in an appropriate way, is because my co-authors see them as being bright red and don't like it. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way to, you know, with the amount that GitHub is being used, if there's a way to attempt to format things where they visually see them, you know, as using poor practice, then people will be more likely to change what they're doing. But if the outcome is only to a downstream user that they don't know, and not to be rude, but they don't care about, then the likelihood that they're going to change their own behavior is smaller.
Yeah, there's another related issue that's equally or perhaps more serious, namely, depending on the age of PDF files, ligatures such as FI, FL, FFL, and so on, and FF may or may not be preserved in copy and paste. And because PDF has been around now for not quite 30 years, there is a lot of this problem in existence, and many tools couldn't handle those ligatures properly. So, and since people often do copy not from HTML, but rather from PDF, that's another place where things can go badly wrong.
In a certain sense, what you want is a two-stage copy and paste. The first stage, you paste it into a linting tool, if you like. And then the second stage is actually accepted. And the copy is an interaction with the source document, the thing you're copying from. But the thing you're pasting to has the choice as to what to do with the paste command. So when you copy and paste, if you copy and paste into editor SuperDuper, the SuperDuper editor can say, I will reject this paste until it has been approved by the author, by the user. That would be the way to fix it from a software engineering point of view. But it lies outside the scope of my project. And my main concern, a sort of beneficial effect of all of this, of what I'm doing, is I want to develop the community. And this Tech Hour has been based upon 3 assessments of archive conversion reports. And the first one took quite a while, and the second one took an hour, and the third one took 40 minutes. And at some point, I'd like to polish up what I've done so that I can do a how-to on how to make a contribution to this project. And I need to have Dinev involved in that as well, because it's really his project I'm asking people to contribute to. But if we can get 20 or 30 people who make it a habit of every so often when they've got nothing better to do, they'll click on the I'm feeling lucky button and just survey what's going on in another tech document. Before you know it, you'll have 100 reports, and then you're in a position to perform some research hypotheses and start doing evidence-based. All this we've been talking about has been based upon 3 examples, and the 2 things that have come out from it really strongly are Unicode characters and copy and paste. Oh, and then the other thing that's come out really strongly out of it is misuse of beginning and ending of math. Kelly's got her hand up again. Thank you, Kelly. You're on.
Yeah, I have a question. So when you say the feeling lucky and, you know, going through that process, can you remind us again what that is? So is it something that you're doing from the command line, or is it just looking at content that's already available?
Okay. It involves command line stuff, the way I do it, because I have to look at the TeX file, which means I have to download it and I have to unzip it and I have to go to a particular location in the file. And at the moment, that's all quite clumsy and awkward. But I'm rather hoping, well, for example, I might be able to set up some sort of web page where some of that stuff is in front of you and the instructions are in front of you. I've done that before for something else when I was at work. So at the moment, it's do as I do, but I haven't shown you what I've done. I've shown you, I've missed out the hard work, so I've shown you the log file, and I've shown you the error report that I produce on GitHub, and I haven't shown you the work that goes in between, although at least one of the error reports contains the gist of it, the vital thing. So how I discovered where the UTF-8 error was.
Yeah, the reason that I asked was because I think that this might be a great thing to do in code spaces on GitHub.
In what?
Code spaces where it's basically you use a Docker file to set everything up, and then you have an instance of VS Code, a text or an IDE, and then everything is there for you. Everything's installed, LaTeX installed. You're on a Linux machine. Like, you can do anything you want without having to set up your own environment. And so if we could provide that Docker file and all people have to do is go to the GitHub repository, and then you just enter a code space, and then through the browser, you're able to render these files with this feeling lucky, and then you can download the log file and look at it and do whatever you want with it, or look at it online. And then that way users wouldn't have an overhead in going through the process of setting their own computer up to process these files. The trouble is CodeSpaces is not free.
Not free?
Correct.
No, they're expensive.
I mean, expensive is relative, and I'm not. So I know that it's not so expensive that the federal government didn't buy some instances of it to allow us to use it. So it can't be too expensive if the U.S. government lets me use it in some capacity.
Okay, okay, so it shows us where we'd like to be, even if we can't afford to buy it. And if we can't afford to buy it and we really want it, then we'll have to ask somebody to dig into their pocket. But yeah, that would be great if we could do it in some way. And that's another reason why I keep on banging on about WebAssembly and LLVM and Rust for that matter, because Rust goes nicely into WebAssembly. So if we could package it up into, if you want to participate, just visit this URL with your browser. Well, maybe that's the thing to do, is to say, if you want to participate in this, visit this web page and I'll tell you what to do and give you as much support as it can. And that at least provides a start. Even if it doesn't work for everybody, it'll work for some people. The people that already have a Linux machine in front of them, for example. But that's a really good suggestion, Kelly.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick point to go back again. Your two-stage copy and paste. I'm wondering if when you copy, your computer doesn't know where it copied from. It might be an idea if it remembers the source, because if it comes from a PDF, then that gives some information to look for ligatures or hyphens, for example, as a general.
The computer must know where it copied from because it issued the request. Oh no!
Yeah, but it doesn't keep that.
Oh no, it doesn't. There's a command line tool that will put something into the clipboard. Yeah, any piece of software can say put this into the clipboard, and I don't think the provenance is recorded. So if you want to do something like that, it's complicated. or it could be complicated. I don't know what the best way to do it, but certainly the recipient can say, this looks like it came from a PDF. This looks like it might be something wrong with it.
Yeah, exactly. But if you do interactively with the mouse, if you copy, I don't think it just copies. It doesn't remember where it came from, so it'll paste your ligature as it was. But
the mouse doesn't move the stuff. The mouse is just the device for changing the focus. So what's happening is it goes onto the clipboard.
Yeah.
That's the copy, and then the paste copies it from the clipboard to the application, and the mouse is simply a way of changing the focus. So you could use tabbing rather than mousing.
Correct. No, yeah, I understand that. Just going back now to the very, very general point, we've been talking only about latex ML. Just going back to sort of helicopter view. We want to find the best way to make, or Archive wants to find the best way to make Archive accessible. Is latex ML, there are different ways of doing that. So have you decided that latex ML is the way? By the way, it's incredible what Dejan has done. As you say, it really looks beautiful. But we need to make sure that 20 years time we don't have to go back again and do the same thing again.
I would say that you say in 20 years time we mustn't go back and have to redo it. On the other hand, we want to make progress and we want to build a community, and all there's conflicting things, and the time to say. The time to make that 20-year decision is not now. It's not this year. The decision as to what things going to be like in 20 years time, is actually quite a weighty thing, and we should evolve our way into that decision. And part of that is evidence-based upon the benefits and problems we have with the accessibility we're producing. So from a different point of view, which is the funding point of view, the funders generally don't care whether you're making the right decision for 20 years' time. What they want to know is this $1 million or $2 million that we're paying you this year going to make a difference next year?
Yeah, but no, hang on. I mean, the funders will listen if you say, look, this is in 2 years' time, we'll have a lot of accessibility, but this method ensures that probably in 20 years' time, you don't have to go back again. And who knows what happens in 20 years' time, but it's something to keep at the back of your mind. And specifically,
it's definitely an important question. Let me take a different point of view of it, which is actually a legal point of view, which is that process is really important in law, and often miscarriages of justice are rectified due to error of process. And that's not nitpicking. It's that the error of process means that somebody is unfairly disadvantaged. Now, the way to show technical expertise, one way to give people confidence is your decision-making process. We need a good decision-making process. And this sounds like a manager rather than we need the right decision. We don't know what the right decision is, or we don't know how to get there, but the process is quite important. And I believe that the LaTeX ML and the R5 deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. And I fully support the decision the Archive has made. And I see no point in looking in we have to have a constructive engagement with LaTeX ML. We have to have a constructive engagement with it because of where it is and what its importance is, even though we may be backing a different horse. And from my point of view, I'm not backing a different horse. I'm saying this is worth exploring. This is something that we need to think about. And even if it gives benefits only for 5% of the articles in the backlog, 5% of 2 million is a significant number. So I'm not focused on those sorts of decisions at this time, because I don't see that they've got any operational consequence. What's the operational consequence of that? Whereas studying the corpus in the way that I've done has already got operational consequences through this meeting, through looking at 3 documents. And I'm essentially taking an agnostic view, or I'm not, what's the word? I'm not taking my own opinions or other people's that seriously, but facts are important. And understanding the corpus is something where we have a bit of a, understanding the corpus that the archive possesses is an area where investment of time and resources will produce benefits. I'm sure of that. I'm sure we've demonstrated that already.
Absolutely no doubt. Absolutely no doubt.
So that's what we should be doing. And we can do other things as well. But I want to make a situation where anybody that wants to participate in understanding the corpus, and believe me, there's nothing like opening up your own, I'm feeling lucky, new document and struggling with it to find out what's going on. And that struggle the first time will be an important learning experience, and it will tell us how to improve things. All the difficulties we're having at this time tell us how to improve things.
Okay, there's no doubt. I mean, you've done great work. You always do great work, Jonathan. And I mean, all the things you found, for example, you know, an equation split into 3, that is really interesting. And I'm just thinking how we could say on the fly, have a system where 90% of those are improved. And of course, it would, as you say, it would improve accessibility because it's one thing as opposed to 3 equations. Just very, very briefly, what I'm saying is there's absolutely no doubt right now that HTML is the way forward, is the best way for accessibility. PDF is not, I believe. So it is the right way to go. What I want to make sure is that we are conscious in 20 years' time. We don't know where we are. We may not have HTML. So what I want to have is in the ideal, absolute ideal scenario, is a way of converting what we have in the archive into some kind of fully structured, it's not going to happen, but fully structured document where you say, this is an equation, this is that, absolutely no doubt. Then we press a button that easily becomes into HTML. In 20 years' time, that structured document can become something else. Who knows? A Google Glass or something that reads it out to you. Does that make sense? Or am I being too
No, that makes
pedantic?
perfect sense. My suggested approach to you for that is that as the R5 material goes onto the archive, and as the accessibility issues, for example, Sarah Hart, become clearer, then we get some image of what some view as to what might be required in what might be desirable in 5 or 10 years' time that is evidence-based. And on the basis of that evidence and on the basis of the internal structures, the intermediate files used by LaTeX ML, and for that matter, the experience of the pretext people, that allows us to have an understanding of what is required today for future-proofing. I would say that the single most important thing for future-proofing is that every calculation we do that is contributing to accessible outputs is reproducible, and we maintain that reproducibility. And oddly enough, today we had an example of a lack of reproducibility because we saw a document that used / today. I wonder how many documents there are in the archive that use / today. If there's only 3 of them, then it's not much of a problem. But if there's 2,000 of them, then it's clearly more serious. And if there's 50,000 of them, or we decide it's really something that we never want to go wrong, we have to make sure that on the archive, when we process documents, we don't let the system determine the date, which is easy to do, but has to be done. So that if you do that, then you always get the same date on the document, even if you run it in 10 years' time or 100 years' time.
I linked your issue to the students working on that problem.
Sorry?
Yeah, working on I linked the issue of the date and time to make sure to the issue you created, showing how to solve it, or mentioning that it could be solved, and passed it along to the students so they can think about how they can incorporate that. So it's a good point.
Well,
it's something.
Ask them to contact me, and I'll give them the technical information they need. And
I will let
the
them
way
know.
the way they can contact me is by contributing to the issue. That's the preferred way they can contact me. And if they want to express their gratitude, then they can press the feeling lucky button and see what comes up.
We have looked at a lot of LaTeX ML output.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. I'm not that interested in the output. I'm interested in the errors. One of the things Don Knuth did was he had an error log, and he wrote an interesting article on the errors of tech, and he categorized them all. And he said that was one of the most important things he did, was logging the errors and understanding where the errors came from. And the categorization of the errors was a bit different than the LaTeX ML. The LaTeX ML categorization is, this is where the system failed at this point, but it doesn't say what the cause of the error was. So Don Knuth has one error, one category which is called blunders. You just do something stupid. Your concentration isn't quite uniformly high through the whole day, then you just make some stupid thing. Fat fingers. Well, I'm pleased with the interest that we've got and the results we've got, because I was a bit worried about this. And my goal is to get a small group of us, including people I don't know, having a go at developing a shared understanding. And Nelson has shared magnificently today, and Kelly has too, a shared understanding of these things. And it's something that will benefit the whole tech community. Every single tech author has problems with copy and paste, and every beginner has problems with knowing how to do the right thing for mathematics. And if we want to get artificial intelligence, machine learning going on, then it might be possible that something like ChatGPT could be given a mathematical formula, but it better not be a state secret. And try and reformat it so that it behaves better.
Yeah, what of the challenge? Okay. One of the challenges that we with accessibility is, it seems like a technical problem a lot of the time, but really after we spend more time looking into it, it's better for authors to think about accessibility as they're writing. Like, you'd really want to incorporate the accessibility in the beginning and not try to tack it on at the end. And so these things like making a math environment, splitting up a math environment into these little sections and then having them all appear in a row, that's something authors should fix. And I'm glad that you're finding ways to identify that and bring that to an author's attention and say, this is a strange way to construct a math, an equation in LaTeX. You put this in one environment. If we were able to show them, this is a weird construct and here's a more, I don't know what taxonic way of representing it. Yeah, this is the right way to format an equation. This is a more canonical approach, and this will convert better into HTML. It'll be more accessible to a screen reader. It's nice to be able to find those
made
things.
a really important contribution to that. The important contribution, you see, it identified this problem without seeing it. And its contribution was, here's a piece of mathematics that doesn't make sense semantically. And if it doesn't,
it's tremendously important.
If it doesn't make, it makes sense visually, but it doesn't make sense semantically. And for that reason, it generates, it's an accessibility problem. And traditionally in the tech world, you say you should do it this way because it looks better this way. Whereas from this point of view, you can give exactly the same advice and say, and it will promote accessibility. I think it's Neil Sofer said at the forum that the extra spaces that you put in to make things look nice cause difficulty when it comes to the semantic analysis and hence the accessibility. And I just remember seeing some document somewhere which had, you know, /exclamation point for putting in a bit of extra space, that sort of thing. Those sorts of things can be detected. I think what's interesting, the LaTeX ML has given everything, is given the tech file a real good going over that other systems haven't. And I think in that way, it's like a good spring clean shows all sorts of problems. You might discover structural problems in a building if you sort of give it a good spring clean, simply because you go to places that haven't been looked at before, looked for a long time. So the LaTeX ML is one of the best tools we've got for looking at the whole corpus. And apart from anything else, it's the only tool we've got, I think, that has looked at the whole corpus from a unified point of view rather than a process this document point of view and consolidated the results.
And I think the fact that it's not tech-based, sorry, forgive me, the fact that it isn't tech, that it's like looking from the outside, looking from with a different kind of lens at the code.
Yeah, yeah, it's a different sort of lens.
And while it's currently based on Perl, there's a Rust version is in the making. So, well, we'll be moving it to a modern. It'll be on a modern language. We're not moving it. Deon's working on it.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say goodbye. Anybody that wants to make some closing comments is very welcome to. Well, I'll say goodbye to everybody, and I don't know what we'll have next week, but I didn't speak about unLaTeX this week, so perhaps I'll speak about it next week. So nice to see everybody, and I hope that in due course I'll have a how-to on how to survey another article and that people will use it. And until then, thank you for coming along.
Thank you again, John.